the moment, he's conducting all his conversations about what his potential future might be from a holiday in the Caribbean after having been to Oregon to get paid a vast amount of money to give a speech. But one thing that is true about Boris Johnson is people know him. They think they know him. They think he's called Boris. His actual name is Alexander Boris de Pfeiffer Johnson. Very well known, certainly an animator, could tell the story of the phoenix from the ashes. And the other thing that would be very potent is that he could say that he had a democratic mandate to be Prime Minister of the UK, something that none of the other candidates can say, meaning a general election could be as long as 2 years away with him as Prime Minister.
Well, that's the whole thing, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to change your party leader when you're in opposition, but when you're in power, you're actually changing the Prime Minister without the consent of the nation as well. Let's look at the rundown of who may be considering running. We've got Rishi Sunak. We've already got Penny Mordaunt, who says that she is definitely running. We've got Boris Johnson there on the sidelines there as well. Who do you think the nation would want?
Look, I think the nation is getting increasingly disengaged. It really is becoming, you use the word chaos, but it's not just the chief executive. What happens with the chief executive has impacts in terms of what happens to everybody who works as part of the organisation. Just a week ago, there was a different Chancellor of the Exchequer. What are people to make of that in terms of consistency with regard to economic policy? A week ago, there was a different Home Secretary. What are people to make of that in terms of any consistency in relation to really important policy as it affects home affairs? I was only out this evening in London with two very senior public servants who I know very well, extremely competent policy professionals, and both of them utterly confused in terms of who their boss might be in the next few days and weeks. So you really have a level of complete stasis in terms of the actual job that government has to do, while you have this ongoing cabaret of who's up and who's down and who's in and who's out. And there are many ways that one can think about this, and the future's always an uncertain place, and I suppose prediction is a bit of a mug's game. But one thing that I heard a very intelligent commentator say earlier, and I think there may be something to this, is when you have a political party and you have MPs within that political party who have become so factionalized, largely because of Brexit, but not solely because of Brexit. But if we just think about Brexit, even if you say all the people who were in favour of Brexit, who are Conservative MPs, what that actually means for each and every one of them is quite different. And when, as a leader, you have to satisfy a party and a membership and members of parliament who are so very factionalized, the only sort of leadership that's going to work is the sort of crude, superficial, gestural, populist, who knows what he's going to do sort of leadership that Boris Johnson offers. It's, you could say, entertaining, but in another way, it's quite toxic, it's quite meaningless, it's erratic. And people, I think, are getting a little tired of it, but that might actually win the day.
If there is this deep division and divisions, really, that exist within the party itself, how will this party take these divisions into the next election? You mentioned there that the next election will be in about 2 years' time. So what we need now in the UK, and the Conservatives will be looking for, someone who can unite that party, who can perhaps paper over the divisions for now, and then also to put the country back on the right economic and social path again. Among the names that are being thrown about right now, do you see anyone there?
Well, it's a big job. It's a very big job anyway. It's a particularly challenging and difficult job now. In Britain, there's inflation of over 10%. It was rather calming for me to just hear reports of the upcoming Australian federal budget overseen by Jim Chalmers, actually hearing ideas about what a well-being budget might mean. well, isn't very much space for any reasonable policy or economic ideas to come to the fore here, because it really has been like rather raucous, out of tune, free-form jazz. We remember the symphony that was the Queen's Jubilee, that was the whole process of mourning around her funeral, and really that was British organisation, and maybe British symphonic organisation at its best. Well, now it's pretty raucous, it's pretty heavy metal, it's pretty nasty, and anybody who wants to predict what happens, I think, is a bit of a mug's game. But the question that you asked about who is most likely, I think it's almost anybody's. Rishi Sunak versus Boris Johnson will be very interesting. I wouldn't underestimate the extent to which Conservative MPs will put a lot of stead on loyalty. Rishi Sunak was seen as having been very disloyal to Boris Johnson as the cause for his demise. There is a great hatred between these two men. Rishi Sunak can say really quite credibly, well, you see, throughout the whole of the election campaign over the summer, I told you what would happen with this crazy, ideological, superficial economic agenda from Liz Truss. Pretty much what he said would happen, happened. So he does have that level of sort of competence, saliency about his offer, but he's also someone who's not really very loved within the Conservative Party or amongst Conservative MPs.